There is a romance and a terror found within the idea of the afterlife, of a grand escape and an inconceivable doom beyond death. It's a macabre contradiction captured in the eclectic horrors of one of Disneyland's most well-loved and uncommon attractions, the Haunted Mansion. The Haunted Mansion has been a staple of Disneyland for 50 years, attracting a singular devotion and fandom unlike any other ride. Its appeal the result of its morbid atmosphere and seemingly bottomless mythology, some manufactured on purpose, some the indirect result of its contentious development. This is a ride whose entire existence sprang from the minds of multiple Imagineers, Disney's term for the artists behind their rides. A ride that was refined over a decade of setbacks and reconsiderations before its debut. A ride that has been subtly reshaped again and again since it first premiered. Over the years, the Haunted Mansion has evolved to allow new effects, new ideas, and new characters to populate its halls, standing side by side with classic effects rooted in the 19th century. The Haunted Mansion has been a house of eclectic horrors ever since its opening in 1969, and that eclecticism in vision, effects, and thematics is what has made the ride as consistently popular as it has been for half a century, creating a one-of-a-kind appeal from its inherent contradictions and esoteric charms. To understand the cause of this eclecticism, we have to go back to the very beginning of the mansion. The origins of the Haunted Mansion are rooted in 1953, when Walt Disney and his Imagineers were still designing the layout for their yet-to-be-built theme park. It was at this time that art team member Marvin Davis conceptualized a small area behind Main Street that dead-ended at a crumbling haunted house, planting the seeds for the mansion. When the mansion's would-be location was turned into New Orleans Square in 1958, the concept was remodeled after plantation homes by artist Ken Anderson, who took inspiration from the Shipley Lydecker House in Baltimore, Maryland, Stanton Hall in Natchez, Mississippi, and Evergreen House at Johns Hopkins University. Meanwhile, Disney himself had already begun to drum up interest in the unbuilt mansion, putting forward the notion of a retirement home for ghosts, collecting specters displaced from their old homes around the world. "The nature of being a ghost is that they have to perform," said Walt, "and therefore they need an audience." However, Walt was unhappy with Anderson's original concept of a rundown, ramshackle mansion sitting amongst the rest of his pristine park. The cleanup of the exterior design was soon completed based on Walt's mandate. "We'll take care of the outside and let the ghosts take care of the inside." Disneyland opened on July 17, 1955. But despite being one of the original ideas for the park, the exterior of the Haunted Mansion didn't rise until 1961. The interior wouldn't be complete for another 8 years. The victim of Walt's constant dissatisfaction, a series of changing, conflicting visions, and a variety of external factors that caused the Haunted Mansion's opening to blow far past its original announced opening date of 1963. For years, a sign stood at the gates around the unfinished mansion that reinforced the ghost retirement home concept. In the time between its initial conception and eventual premiere, the storyline and theming of the Haunted Mansion ran through numerous iterations under Walt's mandate, retaining certain elements and taking some as inspiration for individual characters years later. These concepts include Ken Anderson's story of Captain Gore from February 1957, about an old sea captain who disappeared years ago and his bride, who he possibly murdered and hid in a well. Anderson's Bloodmere Mansion from March 1957, which presented the mansion as the former home of the tragic Blood family, and whose restoration was stopped by a series of deaths. Anderson's lighter story from August 1957, where the so-called lonesome ghost would guide visitors after their mortal guide was taken by a giant hairy arm. A story based on the Legend of Sleepy Hollow from September 1957 that recreated scenes from the old tale and its Disney adaptation, climaxing in a monster party. It was this Sleepy Hollow version that finally saw Disney approve his Imagineers to begin mocking up the various gags and effects that would bring the story to life, but would again be delayed by changes in vision and Walt's decree that his Imagineers shift their focus to making attractions for the upcoming 1964 to 1965 New York World's Fair. The long delays and interruptions led to massive changeovers in staff, including Anderson leaving to work on Sleeping Beauty, and yet another round of concept changes. However, it also gave time for artists Raleigh Crump and Yale Gracie to begin mocking up special effects and illusions. Both men were largely inspired by 19th century magicians and a 1913 popular mechanics book, The Boy Mechanic. Together, the team reviewed everything that had been previously developed for the mansion and began creating new models and lighting effects for Walt Disney's review in 1959. In 1964, Imagineer Mark Davis threw out the Sleepy Hollow concept and penned a treatment where the disembodied ghost host, a concept evolved from the Lonesome Ghost, guided visitors through a mansion that included the elongating room, the portrait gallery, the seance room, and a ghost club room. And it's here where we begin to see the finalized version of the mansion begin to take shape. Creative back and forth would continue with animator X Atencio appointed as the scriptwriter by Walt for the Haunted Mansion after writing Pirates of the Caribbean. A ride show script takes the many different approved elements for an attraction, creates an interconnecting narrative through which writers are guided, and provides the dialogue for any speaking characters. Alongside Davis, Disney assigned background artist Claude Coates to the mansion to create the interior environments for Davis's characters and scenes. But there were contentious disagreements between Davis and Coates, who both believed they should be the project's creative lead, creating further splits in vision behind the scenes. It all came down to the question of whether the Haunted Mansion should be inherently scary, the position held by Claude Coates, or funny, held by Mark Davis. In the midst of this, Walt Disney's death in December of 1966 left the creative team in a battle of wills over the tone and style of the mansion, as well as under pressure to do justice to a ride that Disney had presided over for years. Davis's more lighthearted approach to ghosts and ghouls was ultimately backed by Disney Imagineering Vice President of Design Richard Irvine, but the conflicting tones of Davis and Coates are still obvious in the completed ride. Atencio's show script throws out any semblance of narrative in favor of evolving tone. As such, the duality of Davis and Coates is able to coexist because the Haunted Mansion is more of an experience than a story. Guests must fill in the blanks for themselves and impose their own ideas, resulting in a fan-created mythology that is built on itself for 50 years. The opening segments of the Haunted Mansion are macabre, with guests being welcomed by the disembodied ghost host before seeing his hanging corpse, a nod to the early concept of Captain Gore. But the transforming portraits are all Mark Davis concepts, and the watchful busts are straight from Crump and Gracie. The Misty Limbo, eye-covered wallpaper, and Grand Hall Ghost Party all stem from Coates' vision and rely heavily on atmosphere. But it's Crump and Gracie's numerous illusions that provided the basis for these scenes. The two illusion creators pulled from a wide variety of tricks to help immerse riders in the experience. The elongating room uses a two-part wall and elevator. The watchful busts are concave, while the singing busts in Madame Leota are projections on sculptures of the actors. The floating candelabra is a forced perspective, and the Phantom Party uses the Pepper's Ghost illusion, which utilizes an optical beam splitter to overlay a reflection that can disappear and reappear on command. These many different concepts and effects had all been designed while it was still intended for guests to walk through the Haunted Mansion in a guided tour, room by room. The creation of the Omni Mover, a continuous chain ride car that can rotate 360 degrees, gave the mansion Imagineers the ability to overcome capacity and line speed issues that were created by the walking tour idea. It also meant that riders' attentions would be narrowly focused on each scene while also needing many effects to be rethought. Some illusions, like a dissolving sea captain, simply took too long for a constantly moving ride and had to be scrapped. Every animatronic, every illusion, every noise, every piece of music would need to continually repeat for every rider in a never-ending loop without looking like it. The Omni Movers, now christened Doom Buggies for the mansion, solidified the vision and flow of the ride and its many different effects and characters. But the lingering idea of a walkthrough can be felt in the stretching room and portrait gallery. As guests move further into the mansion, they likewise move further into Davis's lighthearted vision, specifically in the graveyard's swinging wake. The ghosts come in all shapes and sizes, taking inspiration from a decade of ideas and sculpted in much more cartoonish forms than the figures that come before in the ride. Mummies, knights, busts, and more sing along, having come to the mansion from around the world to retire. The audio animatronics used here are given a translucent appearance that uses fluorescent paint and black lights to create ghostly apparitions. It all ends with a final farewell and 3 hitchhiking ghosts looking for a ride. These wandering spirits' cartoonish faces and silly demeanors make it apparent that they too are the work of Mark Davis. But their inclusion was a last-minute decision by Atencio, and the mirror illusion that places the hitchhikers into the Doom Buggy was made possible by Crump. Atencio's show script works to create a natural flow between these various segments, beginning with the somber and creepy opening, to the early ghosts awakened by the disembodied Madame Leota, to the jazzy finale where everyone comes out to celebrate. For all its early doom and gloom, the end of the Haunted Mansion is an afterlife celebration. We've moved beyond the pale and can now see ghostly life as fun and carefree. Connecting these elements is the ever-changing song Grinning Ghosts, which is the product of music from music director Buddy Baker and lyrics from Atencio. Knowing that Yoho was such a success in the Pirates ride, we realized that we'd have to have a song for the mansion too, said Atencio. People will often ask, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, I would just come up with the lyrics and Buddy, the genius that he is, made it work. The song evolves as the mansion changes tone, transitioning from Coates's gloom to Davis's glee. An organ funeral dirge in the foyer, a flute and tubular bells in the loading area, a trumpet and percussion in the seance circle, a sillier organ in the ballroom, and finally a swing band in the graveyard. The tune is buried in the writer's minds before it fully springs to life as fun and carefree. The Haunted Mansion opened its doors to the public on August 9, 1969, but like many Disney attractions, it has continued to evolve as new characters have been added, old ones have been upgraded, and new technology has been implemented to old gags. Madame Leota's crystal ball head began to float in 2005. The pun-filled tombstones slowly disappeared. Real cast members in moving knight's armor were very briefly added for an extra scare in the 80s. And, of course, the annual Nightmare Before Christmas theming returns every holiday season. But the character who most reflects these continual changes is the bride in the mansion's attic. In the early years of the mansion, the bride had a blackened, corpse-like appearance and was surrounded by pop-up skeletons. In the 90s, the bride was updated to emphasize her beating, glowing heart, with its sound filling the attic. And in 2006, she was given a moving, projected face, speaking lines, and a hatchet, with a series of changing wedding portraits to showcase how this now Black Widow bride named Constance made her grisly fortune. But the presence of the bride invokes the spirit of a character who is perhaps the most emblematic of the Haunted Mansion's storied history, wild rumors, and constant changes. The Hatbox Ghost. When the mansion debuted in '69, it featured a macabre figure whose top hat-adorned head would disappear off his shoulders and reappear in the box he held, only to switch back again a few seconds later. But the ghost was removed after only a few days, creating rampant speculation on this most mysterious of haunts. The truth is that the Hatbox Ghost, who accompanied the bride in the attic, wasn't working nearly as well as Imagineers had hoped under the ride's lighting conditions. But like the rest of the attraction's tiniest bits of lore and history, the mysterious Hatbox Ghost inspired decades of speculation, and even an unproduced film by Guillermo del Toro until the ghost was finally placed back in the mansion in 2015 for the 60th anniversary of Disneyland. Now with modern effects to create the illusion Imagineers had wanted in 1969, the reappearance of the Hatbox Ghost was celebrated by mansion fans. All of these varying elements live alongside one another. That deep, eclectic experience means that there is always something new, some small detail, some favorite feature for guests to focus on with each new ride. With these details changing in reinterpretations found at Walt Disney World, Tokyo, Paris, and Hong Kong. The Haunted Mansion encourages its devoted fans to dig deeper until they're completely enveloped by this cartoonish afterlife. Year after year, these 999 happy haunts beckon fans to indulge in their afterlife celebration and become a member of their ranks. Won't you join us?